Hi, everyone. Welcome to our weekly updates from the HEALEY ALS Platform Trial. Today is February 3rd, 2022. My name is Sabrina Paganoni, and I'm an investigator at the HEALEY Center for ALS and Mass General. And today I'm here with Dr. Merit Cudkowicz, the director of the HEALEY Center and sponsor of this trial. And I'm also here with our patient navigation team, Catherine Small and Alison Bulat. So thank you for joining. I'm letting a few seconds go by so that people can join from the waiting room. So thank you. I see participants are joining. Thank you so much for being with us every week. And also welcome to all the new people who are joining us for the first time. So this is meant, for those of you who are new, this is meant to be an informal update. Really what we want to do is to leave as much time as possible for your questions. So we'll have time for questions at the end. Before we get there, if we can go to the next slide, just wanted to provide a very high-level overview of where we are with the HEALEY ALS Platform Trial. As you know, this is a perpetual adaptive trial where we are testing multiple drugs to see if they are safe and effective for ALS. This is a large-scale trial that's going on at multiple sites, and we're testing multiple investigational products. They are listed here, and we started testing 4 of them, zilucoplan, verdiperstat, CNM-Au8, and pridopidine, and we have already enrolled all participants in these first 4 regimens. We call them regimens A, B, C, and D. And people are now either, participants in the trial are now either in the placebo control portion of the trial, or they have already completed that 6 months of placebo control trial and already moved on to an open label extension where they are receiving the active drug of that regimen long term. But what we wanted to focus on today is that we are launching a new regimen, because in addition to completing the testing of the previous 4 drugs, and we'll have the results later this year for those, we're also launching new regimens. This is important to open up new spots for new people, new participants, people with ALS who want to be enrolled. So as of right now, we have 1 regimen open. That's the one labeled in pink, Regimen E or Trialos. And so we literally just started screening. So we have a few sites open, and I want to provide an update on that. So if you can go to the next slide. Initially, when we started the trial, we had a total of 52 sites that are listed here. And then if you can go to the next slide, then we added 2 more for a total of 54. And then next slide, and now we are adding even more, 20 new sites. So again, we have a good reach geographically. The majority of these sites will be open for Regimen E. So if you can go to the next slide, you can see sort of our activation plans. We cannot open all of them at the same time for a number of logistical reasons, including drug supply and sort of logistical processes. So what we're doing is we're activating them in groups, essentially. It's going to be a total of 65 sites or so total, because some sites, due to kind of, logistical capabilities, they may not be able to participate in this particular regimen, but the majority of sites will participate. We have 3 sites that have already been activated: Lehigh Valley, Mass General, and the University of Kansas. So thank you so much to these sites for being the first to be activated. Sites have to complete a number of training activities and administrative steps to be activated. So they are, 3 are activated and the other ones are following shortly. But then again, we will continue to activate over the next few weeks. Having an active site, meaning that that particular site is open to enrollment, can enroll new participants. So if you can go to the next slide, we'll see that we want to keep the community up to date in terms of which sites are open. We have a large number of sites that are active in the network because they started working on regimens A, B, C, and D. And those are active, all active sites that are still following participants actively, because as I said earlier, many people are completing the trial, the randomized placebo control trial, or are receiving active drug as part of the open label extension. But then we have the sites that are also recruiting for Regimen E. So whenever a site is activated and starts recruiting for Regimen E, which is the new regimen, number 5, their status will change on our website. So you can see here an example. For example, it's Lehigh Valley, which was the first site to be activated, is now recruiting, and you have the contact information. So if you go to our website, you can always see sort of the updates in terms of which sites are open for Regimen E. So if you go to the next slide, I do want to introduce you, for those of you who are new, really two very important people that are part of this platform trial. Catherine and Alison are on the call, and they are our patient navigators. So they can be a central resource for all of you. If you have questions, if you don't know which sites are open, or if you have questions about the trial or what to expect, feel free to call them or email them. And they also generated these QR codes if you want to register for our weekly webinars or for our newsletter called the ALS Link. You can always sign up here. And then we're going to resume our tour around the country by having other guest speakers. Those are site PIs. Those are people who are actually participants, PIs working on the trial, at their respective site. And they are, they've enrolled participants in regimens A, B, C, and D. And specifically, we'll have guests from Henry Ford and Wake Forest, and we have more over the next few weeks. And speaking of sites, I want to go to the next slide and ask Dr. Cudkowicz to tell us more about a new site, which is a new addition to the network.
Yeah, I'm very excited that we're launching a new site for the platform trial in Duluth, Minnesota. This is Essentia Health, and Dr. Amber Erickson runs the ALS Center here. This is a center that takes care very well of people with ALS, but they do not have any clinical trials. And so this amazing group of kind of community leaders in ALS in Minnesota called Never Surrender, they asked us if we would add them, and they fundraised around it. And tomorrow, barring major storms and winter problems, Reagan, Healy, and myself are flying to Minnesota and then to Duluth to go and meet and open the center for the platform trial. And then they are having their annual snowboard racing fundraiser, which I'm not participating in, but I am watching. And I'm really excited to go and meet the team there. And they're going to be one of our early sites for Regimen E. And this is just going to broaden access to clinical trials, people that live in that area.
Wonderful, thank you. So with that, I think we can stop sharing the slides and start taking questions. Dr. Cudkowicz, do you want to start with that Q&A? Oh, you're on mute.
Yes, absolutely. So we have a question that if you're a patient at Mass General and the platform drug E is fully enrolled, can you get EAP for any platform drug or not? Or do you have to be, if you're eligible for another trial, can you do EAP or not? If you could maybe explain explain EAP for.
Right, exactly. So EAPs or expanded access are programs that we have in Mass General. They're also available at a few other sites where people who are not eligible for clinical trials can have access to the drug on a compassionate use basis. And so it's sort of an extension of clinical care where people have access to the drug outside of a clinical trial. Now, somebody should not be eligible for a formal clinical trial in order to get into the EAP. Now, I would say that, just thinking about the question, for example, in Mass General, we have several clinical trials that are enrolling. So it's not just Regimen E for the platform trial. So again, I just wanted to also send that message that there are other trials that are enrolling. So this is not the only one. And so it's important that, other trials are also enrolled, and many sites offer more than one clinical trial. If somebody is not eligible for trials at that site, then they could consider the EAP.
Thank you. There's a question that came in before to our patient navigators. If you could really maybe talk about the odds of getting the active drug versus placebo, and also the when open label kicks in.
Yeah, so historically, most clinical trials had a 50-50 chance of being on active drug or placebo, but we wanted to change that. We wanted to lower the chance of anyone being on placebo as much as possible, while still being able to answer the scientific question, which is, does the drug work or not? So the platform trial, the way it works is we use essentially a shared or common placebo group. So for every 4 people that enter the trial, 3 will go on active drug and only 1 will go on placebo. So the chance of being on placebo is 25%. And that's because the 1 placebo basically is shared across different regimens and is used to compare each active drug against a common placebo group. So when you do that, it's basically a win-win situation, because from the point of view of the participant, you have reduced chances of being on placebo. And then from the point of view of sort of, being able to test if the drug works or not, you still have the ability to compare the active drug to a large enough shared placebo group to be able to do the statistical comparison. And then the other nice feature of the trial is that after the placebo-controlled period, which we kept as short as possible to be able to, again, answer the scientific question, which is 6 months, everyone who completes those 6 months can opt in to receive the actual drug, the active drug, long-term. And so we actually have almost 400 people that have been receiving active drug as part of that process. So they have completed the placebo-controlled trial, again, 6 months for each participant, and then they've moved on and they've been on drug for over a year now, basically the first participants, because we will continue to allow them to have access to active drug until we know the final results of the trial. At that point, obviously, if the drug doesn't work, there's no point in being on it. If the drug works, we will work on trying to, again, prolong access.
Thank you. Actually answered one of the other questions, which was how long open label extension programs continue. So related to that, do all trials have to offer open label extension?
No, they don't. It's actually, it's not a sort of a scientific or regulatory requirement, but I think, in my opinion, it's best practice, and that's why we wanted to do it. Obviously, it increases sort of the costs and the complexity of the trial, but that's something that I think is important. We want to design trials that are also, that people want to enroll in, but most of all that they are, fair. So people donate time as part of the placebo-controlled trial, and so then they have the option to try the active drug after they complete, and they give their time so generously.
Thank you. Would you ever consider combination drugs for synergistic effects as another platform or in our platform trial?
Absolutely. In fact, in platform trials in cancer, this has happened. They were testing multiple drugs, and then when one drug was positive, then it was added, it became essentially standard of care, and then other drugs were added as a combination. So that's certainly something that we hope will happen soon, actually. As new drugs are approved, new approved drugs will be allowed, and so people will be able to be on a combination of drugs and then receive an experimental drug on top of that. We could also test different combinations in the future.
So there's someone who says, I've completed Regimen D as of last November. Is there a timeline that results will be publicized?
Yeah, we're working on the timelines for all these regimens. And so essentially, we project that by the end of the year, we will have the final results for all of them. But before then, there will be top-line results. So this is a large amount of data. So essentially, the way the analysis works is that it's essentially physically impossible to have all the results kind of at once, but basically you first do top-line results, meaning the most important results, does the drug work or not, and then there's a process for having all the additional biomarkers, all the additional complementary data that are so important too.
There's a question about a recent paper that came out on MP001, and I'm happy to take this since I was a co-author on it. It's based on the phase 2 results of MP001. Do you know if the company is requesting FDA approval similar to Amylyx phase 2? And can you elaborate on the findings? So the MP001 phase 2 trial is very different than the Amylyx one. In particular, it was a negative phase 2 trial. So when they did the first analysis, there wasn't a difference between the treated group and placebo. What the company's since done is really looked carefully at the first study they did and the second study. They're both small studies, and looked to see if there might be subsets of people that might have had a better response. So they did what we call a post hoc analysis. So after the trial's done, just look to see if there might be a group that had some difference. And they did find that, and that's what the paper was just published. So the next step is, I think they announced they're going to talk to the FDA about the next step, but that would traditionally be another trial in the subset where they think they saw an effect. But again, they're going to go talk to FDA about what would be required. This is a drug that works on inflammation. So what more to come on that? There's a question, is there any genetic treatment being tested, or is it only drugs being tested?
As of right now, all the drugs that we're testing are applicable essentially broadly to all forms of ALS. They're not about one specific genetic subtype. In the future, one could think of also including genetic treatments, or maybe even setting up a separate platform trial focusing on specific genetic mutations.
There's a question around phase 1 trials, which might have different risks than like the phase 2 or 3 trials. Some of them require lumbar puncture, some of them require overnight stay in the hospital. I think this question, and I'm sorry, we can't unmute you, but I think if I can interpret the question right, is that let's say you're not eligible for like the platform trial, and the only other trial is a phase 1. Do you have to go in the phase 1 rather than an expanded access, or how do you balance that eligibility question?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, I would say, first of all, not all phase 1 trials are the same. Again, I don't think that necessarily they're more risky, but in general, I think it depends on what's available at that site. So if somebody is eligible for trials at that site, I believe that's sort of it's going to be a discussion with the investigator essentially to see what's reasonable, what's what's the eligibility for that particular person at that particular site. Again, I think in general that's that's a general principle. We do know that we really want to support expanded access programs, but it's also important that those do not sort of interfere with the clinical trials. I think that's that's something that it's important for several reasons. I don't know, Merit, if you want to expand on that.
Yeah, I mean, we're all very excited about the Act for ALS and the ability to have funding for expanded access programs, which are really for the almost maybe 50% of people with ALS are not eligible for the trials. But it was very clear from that law and from, really just the best thing for ALS is that those expanded access programs cannot derail clinical trials, because the only way we're going to actually know if drugs work and get them to the market and get them to everybody is the trials. So I know there was a Everything ALS yesterday on this topic as well. And I'd say the ALS field is learning about it. It's great that it's starting finally, and that there's going to be funding for it. That related, there's another question about expanded access, which is if we know if Medicare subsidizes compassionate care or EAP drugs.
So Medicare only reimburses for approved drugs. That's my understanding. And so there's no subsidy for EAPs per se from Medicare.
Yeah. I know there's a question again about phase 1 trials, whether they're risky. And I'll just say, first of all, any trial someone's considering, you should be obviously talking to your neurologist or your primary care, whoever you trust, to go over the consent form and the risks and the science behind it. In phase 1 trials, because they're often the first time given to a patient population, have more uncertainty about safety. And often the goal of the phase 1 trial is to determine safety, but it's still gone through FDA review and ethics review, and still has all the animal studies. So everything's done to minimize that risk. But clearly, once the drug's in later stage testing, 2 and 3, we know the safety, from the phase 1 trial. So you have more knowledge about the risks. But you can't get to phase 2 or 3 without phase 1. And often those phase 1 trials are really important. And they're now designed in ALS so that people who are in the phase 1 trials often have the option to continue an open label extension. So they're all a little different. And it's really key to discuss the risks and what's known about it with your neurologist. There's a question about whether open label is subsidized, or do you have to pay for that part?
So the trials will cover the cost. So basically the open label, which is different from expanded access. So the open label is part of the actual trial. And so people don't have to pay to participate, but insurance companies are not charged either. So it's a research process and support.
This question about Regimen E is, if someone starts, let's say, at the Mass General site, can they transfer to another site as they open up? And if not, maybe you could explain perhaps a little bit why.
Yeah, so unfortunately, it's very difficult to transfer from one site to another. And the reason is really the complexity of the management of the database and the drug delivery. There is an interactive randomization system that basically brings drugs directly from a central depot to the site. And so if somebody were to transfer to a site, the whole system would have, would have to be readjusted. And it's actually very complex because this is a blinded study. So, the pharmacists, the study staff, nobody knows, what drug that person is taking. And so it's all automatic. And so transferring sites actually does cause, a number of logistical problems that are actually very hard to solve.
The good thing I'd say about Regimen E is because it's an intravenous weekly infusion, after week 4, we have contracted with a company that will do the infusions in the home. So the visits are, we still have people come in for the every 8-week or so visits, but a lot of it is done in the home. So if someone started at one site, it might be feasible to continue. But again, that could be worked out on an individual basis. There's a question if we can address if there's a delineation or breakdown between limb onset and bulbar ALS in the efficacy of the platform trial drugs. To your knowledge, has any trial of medications looked at this?
So for the platform trial, the drugs that we are testing are meant to target disease progression in all forms of ALS, whether somebody has limb onset or bulbar onset. And I also want to mention that sometimes, people maybe don't have bulbar involvement. For example, at the beginning, might have it at a different stage. So it also depends on not just the onset, but sort of the involvement at the time of participation in the trial. But the drugs that we're testing are applicable to all. In terms of, previous trials, I guess a good example could be Nudexta, where, there was a specific, effect that's separate from this trial. It happened a few years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, when there was this finding that Nudexta could help with bulbar function. But again, that's the one example I remember.
Yeah. Good. I don't see any other questions. I will say that next week, hopefully next week or the week after, we can.
Oh, I think you had
Sorry.
a technical issue. Yeah.
Yeah, no, someone was in the room. I just had to go silent for a second. Next week or the week after, we will present all the timelines, our anticipated timelines for having the results of the first 4 regimens. We're almost done with projecting that. I have learned through COVID, though, that nothing is actually really predictable. So, but we're going to do our best. There's a lot of things that keep jumping up that seem to slow things down, but we're on a mission to get the results as fast as possible.
Great. So we'll see you next week.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye.